Chapter 3. After what seemed like only a few seconds, the light returned. I felt different, as if I were waking up from a dream. I opened my eyes and saw what looked like a hospital room, but everything was slightly blurry. To my left was a woman, maybe in her early 40s, wearing a lab coat and looking at a small tablet computer. She was thin, perhaps a little taller than average. Her hair was dark, but she had a few thin gray streaks. She had it tied behind her head in a bun. I tried to read her name tag, but my eyes had not yet fully focused. It looked like it said, Dr. Cam. To the doctor's right was a man wearing a three-piece suit. He was of average height, but seemed to be in good shape. His suit couldn't hide that he was obviously into physical fitness. He looked slightly younger than the doctor, perhaps in his late 30s, with dark hair and a handsome, chiseled face. For a moment, I thought he might be an actor, and I was on some weird reality show. Next to him was a man wearing an army uniform. He had straight, dark hair with a bit of gray at the temples. He reminded me a little of Pierce Bronson, but shorter and younger. I noticed he had 2 stars on his shoulders. I had never been in the military, but I was pretty sure that meant he was a major general, which was surprising because he seemed young for that rank. The fact that he was there made me even more concerned. If this wasn't a joke, I was in the middle of something serious. The doctor spoke first. "Welcome back, Mr. Newman," she said. "I'm Dr. Carr. How are you feeling?" "I feel fine," I said, my voice a bit hoarse. "Where am I? What happened?" Whatever was happening felt very weird. It seemed like only a few minutes had passed since I was in my father's lab, but I was indeed out for a while. If I were unconscious, why didn't I dream? Do unconscious people dream? Maybe being in Dad's lab was a dream, or perhaps I was dreaming now. All these thoughts ran through my head. "Hello, Alex," interrupted the man. "My name is Scott Parker. I run this facility. This is General Brian Rafferty. We have a lot to share with you, but much of it is confidential information. I will tell you all I can, but first, the good doctor needs to monitor you for a while to ensure you are okay. I will come back soon." With that, he turned and walked out the door. The general paused for a second or two, and then followed Parker out the door. I tried to sit up but couldn't, and realized I was strapped to the bed. What the hell is going on here? Am I a prisoner? "Please relax, Mr. Newman," the doctor said. "You have several sensors attached to your body, and the straps keep you from accidentally removing them. Please lie still for about 10 minutes. That should give me enough data, and then we can unhook you and let you stretch your muscles." "Fine," I said. "It's not like I have much choice." She smiled warmly and said, "I'll be back in a few minutes." When she walked out, I saw a man standing outside the door. He was wearing the uniform of a security guard. Several minutes later, Dr. Carr, Scott Parker, and the general returned to the room together. The doctor looked at her equipment and pulled the sheet to uncover my bare chest. "We'll have you out of this in just a minute," she said as she pulled the sensors off me. She then pulled the sheet back up and walked toward the door. "Wait," I said, "what about the straps?" She stopped briefly, but, without looking back, continued out the door. "I will take care of that, Mr. Newman," Parker said. "But first, I need to discuss a few things with you." "What things?" I asked. General Rafferty said, "What we are about to tell you is top secret. You cannot divulge anything you learn here to anyone, and I mean anyone. Doing so could be considered an act of treason. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, even though I didn't understand. The whole thing seemed like a dream, but it was more like a nightmare. "My company is called Parker Biosystems," Parker said. "We contract almost exclusively with certain branches of the government, mostly the military. Our specialty is in integrating technology with human biology. I can't talk about most of what we do here, but some things are no longer classified. You may have read about paraplegics who can spell words using their minds. We developed a similar technology for the Air Force that allows pilots to control their aircraft using just their thoughts. That may not seem like it would make much difference, but the split-second delay between thought and action could be the difference between life and death for a fighter pilot." "That's all fascinating, Mr. Parker, but what does that have to do with me?" "Well, manipulating machines using the mind eventually led us to think about the reverse. What if we could change the mind using a machine? At about this time, we heard about your father's invention. An invention he never got a chance to tell me about, I said. Oh, but he did, Parker said. That's just not something that you would remember. How would you know what I remember or don't remember? I tried to remain calm, but the words came out quite loud, and I'm sure my frustration was showing. I understand that this situation can be very unsettling for you, but please, let me continue. I said nothing, and Parker continued. In simple terms, your father invented a way to record human memory. In other words, he could record the positions of each of the tens of billions of neurons and their corresponding connections responsible for human memory. Of course, we have made progress, but we are still years away from decoding that information into something we can understand. Despite that, we thought it might be possible to imprint the recorded memory onto another human mind. It took us 5 years, but we finally succeeded in doing just that. 5 years? My father just told me about his breakthrough 30 minutes ago. It's very complicated, Mr. Newman. I'm afraid just over 5 years have passed since the last memory of your father was created, he said. That was a weird thing to say, I thought. What exactly does that mean? You may have difficulty accepting this, Mr. Newman, but you are not who you think you are, Parker said. When your father put you in his machine, he recorded all your memories. We put those memories into another human being. So, your mind is that of Alex Newman, but your body is not. I was worried before, but now I saw this was an elaborate joke. I started laughing because I knew someone had gotten me good. Finally, I said, "Oh my God, this is probably the greatest practical joke I have ever seen or even heard about. Who put you up to this? My wife? My dad? Am I on TV?" "This is no joke, Mr. Newman," Parker said. "Let me show you." With that, he unhooked the straps holding me to the bed and held out his arm to help me up, but I waved him off and sat up on the bed. I was surprised to see I was dressed in something other than a hospital garment. I had no shirt, but I was wearing black polyester pants like the security guard standing outside. The pants had a black belt, but that was it. I had no socks or shoes and no watch. I felt the front pockets. They were empty, as I expected. I didn't want to be obvious, so I didn't try to check the back pockets, but I knew they would be empty too. Parker then seemed to realize I was underdressed. He opened the door and said something to the guard. He looked around the room, presumably for a mirror, but not finding one, reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped several buttons to bring up the camera app and handed it to me. What I saw shocked me. The face on the screen wasn't me at all. This face was very different than mine. My dark hair and brown eyes were replaced by sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. He had a handsome face, with the beginnings of a beard, and looked to be in his mid-20s, about the same age as me, or the last age that I remember being. I still wasn't entirely sure it wasn't a trick, so I turned my head back and forth and raised my hand into the frame. The image followed along perfectly. I wasn't convinced the phone was not distorting the image, so I turned it off and looked at myself in the screen's reflection. The reflection looked like the image I had just seen. I then took a close look at my hands. Everyone always talks about knowing something like the back of your hand, but the backs of my hands were different than I remembered. That is when I knew for sure it was true. My voice was also different, deeper. I first assumed an illness caused it, but that was not the case. "I can answer any questions you might have," Parker eventually said. "Might have," I said as I handed the phone back to him. "I definitely have questions. First and foremost, what happened to the real me? Am I dead? The real you is fine. He is living a quiet life with a wife and 2 kids. 2 kids? Yes, you have a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. Your father told me there is another on the way too." The thought of having 2 children out there and 1 on the way filled me with joy and sorrow at the same time. How could I possibly be a parent to 3 children with a father who isn't me? "Can I see them?" I said. "I don't think that would be a good idea, but if you want, I could try to find a photograph of them," he said. "That would be great." "I suppose you want to know about this body you inhabit." That was my next question. Whoever this was, you have essentially taken his life away, and that's some sick shit if you ask me. This is where it gets complicated, Parker said. You mean it wasn't already complicated? He ignored my question and said, You can never repeat what I am about to tell you. Do you understand? I understand, just like the last time. No need to repeat your threats, I said as I looked at the general. The general interjected, Never means never, son. To this, there are no exceptions. I just looked at him but said nothing. Parker continued. The government has been experimenting with cloning for several years. They harvested the DNA from some of the most physically and mentally exceptional people they could find. This person you are occupying was grown from that DNA. Human cloning is illegal in this country and every other country as far as I know, I said. Do you think the government never breaks its laws? He said. This body is over 20 years old, I said. They barely had the technology to clone humans back then, and I doubt they could have kept it a secret for that long. Besides, clone or not, he was still a real person, and you took his mind from him. We have made great strides in cloning recently. This clone is about 4 months old, Parker said. He has never been conscious and was essentially grown in a lab using accelerated growth techniques. It is quite amazing, but it is not one of this company's operations, so I can't tell you much about it. Our client provided him for us. You mean the Army? I said, looking at the general. I'm afraid I can't tell you that, Parker said. Then why me? Why did you bring me back and not someone else? Not long after you visited your father in his lab, we convinced him to come to work for us, he said. With his help, we developed the means to transfer a person's mind, consciousness, if you will, into a host body. 3 months ago, your father corrupted the software and all the data associated with his mind recording device, including all our recordings. He then disappeared. That doesn't sound like my dad. Why didn't you have backups? With something this big, I would have backups of backups. We did have backups, Parker said, but the secret nature of this operation meant that we couldn't risk uploading anything to the cloud or even removing a copy from this secure facility. Your father had access to those backups, and he also corrupted that data. So, how did you get access to my brain scans? When your father came to work for us, we bought the technology from the university. They were required to give us everything related to his invention and keep no backups. But when your father disappeared, we returned to the university hoping to find something we might have overlooked. It turns out that the data involved in copying someone's memory is so large that it requires its own hard drive. We found 3 removable drives that everyone overlooked. Yours, one belonging to your wife, and another belonging to a student. We used your data to bring you back, hoping you could help us find your father. I find it hard to believe that a single hard drive is big enough to fit all that information, I said. I mean, I know the human brain has a huge storage capacity. I don't know what that is, but one hard drive seems too small. There's actually room to spare, Parker said. For one thing, the machine doesn't scan the entire brain, only the conscious memories. Things like muscle memory, instinct, and all the mundane tasks the brain is responsible for are not recorded. In addition, the data is compressed. The fact that the machine did not record muscle memory surprised me and raised some questions that I decided to keep to myself for the time being. Instead, I asked, why didn't you just enlist the help of the real Alex Newman? We felt the odds of success were too low, Parker said. We were certain that Alex would not leave his family for an unknown period to get involved in a search like this. Besides, we needed to test the machine on a human subject. If it didn't work, retrieving the lost data would have become less important. So, I'm just a lab rat? I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Alex, Parker said. You were a means to an end, but it worked, and you are alive and well. Now we need your help. If my father did what you say he did, he must have had a good reason. If I help you find him, what will you do with him? Put him in jail, or worse. I think you wasted your time resurrecting me, Mr. Parker. As soon as I said that, I realized how stupid I was. I needed to leave the door open, or I would be useless to them. We think a foreign government may have coerced your father, the general said. There have been reports that the Russians want to acquire this technology, and they may have forced him to turn over his data and destroy it on our end. There is no evidence he took any money, so we think they threatened his life or that of a family member, perhaps your life, the other you. He might have given the Russians a copy of his research and then disappeared to avoid prosecution. Our best hope is that he gave the Russians false information and then hid to prevent retaliation. Whatever the reason, he must know that his family is in danger, so he won't be able to stay hidden for long. When he is found, you would want to be sure the right people find him. Your story seems like quite a stretch, I said. I also didn't hear any good reason that I should help you put my father in jail. That is where he would be going if he lives that long, since your concern about the Russians being after him is probably total bullshit. I wanted him to believe I would follow his plan, but folding too soon would look suspicious. He needed to believe I was convinced. The thing is, Alex, your father wouldn't go to jail if you helped us find him, Parker said. Some powerful people can't let the Russians get ahead of us on this technology. If we can locate your father and obtain the necessary information, they will offer him immunity from prosecution. After all, trying to save your son is not a crime. We also wouldn't want the publicity of a trial. He smiled after this last statement, but his smile quickly disappeared, and he said, however, he has been put on a government watch list because finding him is extremely important to a lot of people, but if a government agency finds him first, then I don't know what will happen to him. I didn't trust him, but I did believe he would do anything to avoid publicity. The only thing I could do was play along until I could think of a way out. Okay, I don't know how to help, but I will do what I can. I'm choosing to trust you and expect you to honor your promise. Of course, Parker said. I want nothing more than to get your father back to the lab, safe and sound. You will stay here for a couple of days so the doctor can do more tests. Then we will get started. The door opened, and the guard handed Parker a shirt. Here, he said, put this on, and gave me the shirt. He then turned and walked out the door. The general followed him out. I put the shirt on. It was a white polo shirt with the letters PB printed next to what looked like a strand of DNA. I assumed it was the Parker Biosystems logo. I got up and walked to the door. I thought it would be locked, but I wanted to check anyway. It was locked. I looked around the room. I wanted to see if there was another way out, but I saw none. The room had no window, not even on the door, which was heavy-gauge steel. The ceiling had air vents, but they were way too small to climb through. The walls were concrete blocks, so I wasn't going through a wall. It seemed I would have to play their game for a while longer. After a few minutes, Dr. Carr returned. She put a disposable thermometer in my mouth and checked my pulse and blood pressure. She looked at the thermometer and said, "You seem in good health, Mr. Newman. I will recommend that you be released tomorrow if nothing changes between now and then." After she left, I sat for a long while thinking about my situation and decided that sleep was probably a good idea. I could not do much, so being well rested before tomorrow might help me. Just as I decided to try to sleep, there was a knock at the door, and it opened. A young woman walked in and propped the door open. She wore the outfit of a cleaning lady, similar to that of a hotel maid. Outside the door was her cart of cleaning supplies. I could see the guard was still there, too. It was hard to tell from the back, but the guard looked different this time. They probably had a shift change recently, but since the room had no clock, I had no idea what time it was. The young woman had a spray bottle in one hand and a cloth in the other. She started to wipe down the room. She looked to be Latino. I guessed she was in her late 20s, somewhat shorter than average, with her long, dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She was attractive, and I imagined she was probably stunning when she let her hair down and dressed up for a night out. "I'm sorry for the interruption, sir," she said with a Spanish accent. "I won't be long." I noticed her name tag said, Gabriela. I said, "Take your time, Gabriela. I can use the company." She looked down at her name tag and back at me, saying, "Most people call me Gabby. It's very nice to meet you, Gabby." "It is nice to meet you too, sir." "Alex. My name is Alex." "Alex," she repeated. "It is nice to meet you, Alex." She wiped down the equipment near me and quietly said, "Don't look up. This room is monitored. I'm a friend of your father's. If you want to leave here, be ready in 1 hour. When I leave, turn out the lights and pretend to sleep. I have no shoes, I said. Don't worry, 1 hour, she said. She then continued to clean in silence for a few minutes. I kept quiet too, not knowing if there were microphones as well as cameras in the room. As Gabby left the room, she looked me in the eyes but said nothing. I did what she said. After she left, I flipped the switch at the door, lay on the bed, and waited. Most of the small amount of light in the room was coming from under the door. I tried to locate the camera, but it was too dark. I figured it was also too dark for the camera to see me unless it had night vision. Either way, whoever monitored the cameras would get bored watching after a while, which was probably her intention. I waited in the dark for what seemed like well over an hour, and then I heard 3 light taps on the door. I jumped out of bed and headed toward the door. It opened slightly, and the woman Gabby stuck her head in and said, "Come on." I slipped out the door as quickly as possible and looked around. The guard at the door was gone. Where is the guard? The guard is not needed this late. Here, put these on. They belong to my brother. I hope they fit. She handed me a pair of used tennis shoes. They were in good shape, but I was apprehensive about putting my bare feet into someone else's shoes. I decided it was the least of my worries at the time and quickly slipped them on. They were slightly big, but I knew that was way better than slightly small. I tied them up and followed Gabby down the nearest hallway where she had her cleaning cart. She lifted the towel hanging from the side, revealing a small, empty cavity. "Get in," she said. I wasn't sure if I could fit, but I sat down inside the cart, bent my head, pulled my knees up, and squeezed inside. She put the towel back in place and pushed me in the cart for another 20 or 30 feet. She then turned to the right, and we got on an elevator. I expected Gabby to say something at this point, but heard only silence. I assumed the elevator was also being monitored, so I remained quiet. Once we were off the elevator, I heard a male voice say, "Hi, Gabby. I see you are working late tonight." "Yes, there were extra rooms that needed cleaning tonight." "Well, you have a good night. See you next week." "You too, Joe. See you next week." This audiobook continues on the next video. For more information on this book and others by this author, please visit charleshuss.com.